The match that never happened, but still shook the tennis world. Imagine a 44-year-old legend stepping back onto the most famous grass courts on the planet after an absence of nearly 4 years. The entire stadium thought they already knew the ending. They were wrong. What unfolded at Wimbledon 2026 became one of the strangest and most emotional subplots of the season. And what made it truly special was that this story didn't need a villain, because the true focus was never about a defeat. It was a story of timing, of destiny, and of a 21-year-old girl from the Philippines who refused to become a mere footnote in someone else's comeback story. Before we dive into the details, if you love tennis and don't want to miss behind-the-scenes stories like this, hit the subscribe button for Pro Tennis 360 right now, because the rest of the story is far more surprising. For nearly 4 years, Serena Williams vanished from singles draws. No retirement announcement, no official farewell. She simply walked away, stepping into that ambiguous space that every sports legend eventually faces, where fans constantly ask, has she really stopped? While the athlete only offers riddle-like answers. In 2022, she used the word evolving instead of retired, deliberately avoiding finality. Since then, that phrase hung in the air like an open door that no one expected her to walk back through. Then, in the final week of June 2026, that door swung wide open. The All England Club organizers awarded Serena the final singles wildcard, sending the tennis world into an absolute frenzy. This was no ceremonial farewell tour to wave goodbye to the fans. Serena Williams, winner of 23 Grand Slam titles and a 7-time Wimbledon champion, regarded by many as the most dominant player in the history of the sport, was returning to genuinely compete, not to put on a show. Serena had been quietly preparing for this comeback for months. What few people noticed was that Serena didn't enter this comeback on a whim. She had spent months quietly rebuilding her competitive rhythm. As early as February 2026, she proactively re-entered the drug testing pool, a mandatory procedure to be eligible for competition. It was a small detail that spoke volumes about how seriously she took this return. No one signs up for anti-doping testing just for a media stunt. She started with doubles matches at Queen's Club, playing alongside a much younger partner, and secured a win in her very first match back. After that, she partnered up again in Berlin, testing her movement, her ball striking, and her confidence. Throughout the process, cameras caught glimpses of her practicing in private. No explanations, no grand announcements, letting her tennis do the talking. When the official announcement dropped that she had received a wild card for the singles draw as well, the WTA practically challenged the entire tennis world on social media, implying whether anyone could find a bigger comeback story. No one could answer that question. But while the entire internet was losing their minds over Serena's return, a completely different narrative was quietly gathering momentum in another corner of the draw. A story that would soon collide with Serena's in a way no one could have scripted. The architect of that story was named Alex Eala. If you hadn't heard that name before the summer of 2026, you almost certainly do now. At 21 years old, born and raised in Quezon City, Eala carried the hopes of an entire nation that had never had a player reach the true elite tier of Grand Slam tennis. It was a journey where, for years, she had to fight for recognition in tournaments that most casual fans never watched. Eala's story didn't begin with glory. It began with a heartbreak that she carried with her for 2 long years. And that is exactly what we will explore next. The heartbreak from 2 years ago still haunted Eala every night. 2 years before Wimbledon 2026, at a quarterfinal match in North Carolina, a then-teenage Alex Eala let a victory slip right through her fingers against the seasoned veteran named Renata Zarazua. She had won the first set convincingly, playing tennis that completely outmatched her opponent, before everything gradually collapsed in the final moments, leading to a heartbreaking defeat by the narrowest of margins. That kind of loss doesn't just hurt in the moment, it stays with you. It becomes the kind of match an athlete replays in their mind at 2 a.m. year after year, wondering how things might have gone differently with just one alternative shot. But by the time she stepped on the grass at Wimbledon 2026, she was a completely different player. She had just won a grass court title in Birmingham. She reached the semifinals in Berlin. Along the way, she took down not one, but two world top 10 players, defeating the world number 2 and number 8 in short succession, results that could not be dismissed as mere flukes. Her ranking soared, and then destiny threw in an unexpected bonus when another player withdrew due to injury, propelling Eala into a seeded position in the draw. For the first time in her country's tennis history, a Filipino player entered a Grand Slam singles draw as a seed. Not as a curious wildcard case, not as a brave little underdog story manufactured for television, but as a legitimate seed, a player whom the tournament organizers themselves decided needed protection in the draw. Back home, the news hit like an earthquake. This wasn't a niche sports update buried on the back page. This was front page news, trending nationwide. The kind of news that makes people hang flags out of their windows, because tennis had never had a moment that belonged to the Philippines quite like this before. And Eala wasn't done making headlines. Waiting for her in the first round was the exact opponent who had broken her heart 2 years ago, Renata Zarasua. This time, the script was rewritten in an entirely different fashion. Eala stepped onto the court under the lights, thousands of miles away from home, yet somehow surrounded by a sea of red, white, and blue, the colors of the Filipino diaspora who had found their way to that outside court, determined to make themselves heard. And she fully rewarded their faith. She reclaimed victory, closed out the match, and watched the stands erupt in a way that outside courts at Wimbledon rarely witnesses. 2 years of pent-up emotion were released in a single afternoon. But this is when the story truly became fascinating, because while all of this was happening, pundits and former players were already looking ahead, practically salivating at how the draw was opening up. Former world number 5 Greg Russetti publicly predicted that Serena would get through her first-round opponents, and Eala would win her opener, and setting up what he called an inevitable second-round blockbuster on center court. Andy Roddick, former world number 1, provided a deeper technical analysis, pointing out that Eala's ability to change the direction of the ball and stretch the court horizontally could exploit the vulnerabilities in Serena's movement after such a long layoff. These weren't random predictions from commentators just looking for views. These were astute tennis minds recognizing that something truly compelling was brewing. A 44-year-old legend defying time on one side, a 21-year-old making history on the ride of her life on the other, and a date on center court that sounded almost too good to be true. And then it all collapsed with one brief announcement. Serena's first-round match went smoothly enough, but as the dust settled and the second round approached, she suddenly withdrew from the tournament. The reason given was vague, nothing official, nothing definitive. Just a kind of quiet withdrawal that left fans searching for explanations that would likely never fully arrive. The dream match, the clash that had been built up for over a week through headlines and endless predictions, simply vanished before it even began. There would be no dramatic 3-set battle, no passing of the torch moment captured in slow motion to be replayed thousands of times. There was only an empty slot in the draw where a legend was supposed to stand. You might think this would deflate the entire narrative, right? The massive showdown collapsed before it began, so where was the payoff? But this is precisely when the story became even more interesting than the fairy tale ending everyone had been hoping for. Because Alex Eala didn't need Serena Williams to validate the journey she had just taken. She had already achieved what no player from her country had ever done. She had settled a score with a loss that had haunted her for 2 years. She had proven through her 2 top 10 victories in the preceding 2 weeks that her success was no flash in the pan. A match against Serena would have been a spectacular showcase, no one denies that. But its absence did not erase what Eala had built. In fact, in a strange way, it shone the spotlight squarely on her alone, rather than forcing her to share it. Every headline that was supposed to read, "Serena faces rising Filipino star," now became, "Rising Filipino star continues historic run." And that was perhaps a much more powerful narrative for a young player striving to prove she wasn't just a footnote in someone else's comeback story. What makes Eala compelling isn't just the victories. What made Eala's rise resonate so deeply with viewers wasn't just the winning stats on paper, though they were impressive enough on their own. A rock-solid run on tour, a particularly dominant stamp on grass, a title, a semifinal, and victories over top 10 opponents. What truly made her story special was what she shared about why all of this mattered to her. In pre-tournament interviews, Alice spoke about the deep sense of community woven into Filipino culture, about how the success of one individual in that community becomes a shared pride for everyone connected to them. That wasn't a rehearsed PR answer. Those were the words of someone who knew exactly what she was carrying every time she stepped onto the court, thousands of miles away from home. She wasn't just chasing ranking points or prize money. She was representing something far larger than individual ambition. And you could feel that in the way an entire nation mobilized behind her, packing the stands wherever she played, turning hashtags into global trends, and transforming a tennis match into a genuine cultural moment. Meanwhile, Serena's story took a quieter turn. Whatever the reason for her withdrawal, she had accomplished the harder part of this entire comeback journey, proving to herself and to a sport she had dominated for 2 decades that she still belonged on that grass. She became the second oldest woman in the Open era to compete in a singles main draw in Wimbledon, trailing only Martina Navratilova, a comparison that underscores just how rare this kind of comeback is. She also paired her singles ambition with a doubles reunion with her sister, Venus, both stepping back onto the court where they had built so much of their shared legacy. Win or lose, the willingness to try at 44 spoke volumes. Win or lose, advancing or withdrawing, the mere fact that Serena decided to test herself at age 44 when she had absolutely nothing left to prove and risk tarnishing a fraction of her legacy if things went sideways spoke volumes about who she is as a competitor. Legends don't return to the biggest stages because they need external validation. They return because a part of them still needs to push the boundaries of what is possible. That is a very different kind of courage than that of a young player trying to make a name for themselves, but both deserve equal respect. When the internet began debating what had actually happened here, whether this was a symbolic passing of the torch moment or simply 2 athletes on separate paths briefly sharing a headline, they seemed to miss a much more interesting question. This story wasn't really about comparing a 44-year-old legend with a 21-year-old prodigy and deciding who won an abstract battle for the future of the sport. It was about 2 completely different forms of courage coexisting in the same tournament at the exact same time. One woman defying age, defying physics, defying years of inactivity just to see if the fire inside still burned. Another woman defying history, defying geography, defying the weight of representing a nation that had never seen a player reach this level, and doing so not with hesitation, but with a calm, clinical brand of tennis that forced scouts and experts to take notice. Neither needed the other to validate their story, even if the tennis world spent an entire week acting as though their potential meeting was the only thing that mattered. And perhaps that is the truest lesson hidden within this entire saga. We love neat narratives, the passing of the torch, the iconic showdown, the master and the apprentice meeting under the lights in an unforgettable match. But real sports rarely cooperate with that tidy structure. Sometimes the match you've been anticipating for weeks simply doesn't happen, and life moves on. And somehow the remaining story is just as compelling, if not more so, because it doesn't need to rely on a blockbuster theatrical performance to prove its worth. Alex Eala's run at the tournament remained defined by her own results, her historic seeding, and the fact that she finally closed the chapter on a loss that had dogged her for 2 years. Serena's journey, however it concluded, was defined by a simple yet heavy truth, that she showed up, putting her body and her legacy on the line one more time, just to see what was still possible. So perhaps the real question isn't whether this was the biggest blockbuster that never happened, or whether this was the start of a new era cut short before it could fully take shape. Perhaps the real question is why we always need one athlete to fail spectacularly for another's rise to feel justified. Alex Eala didn't need to beat Serena Williams to prove she belonged at Wimbledon. She had already proven it days prior, point by point, match by match, in front of a crowd draped in the colors of a country that had waited generations for a moment exactly like this. Eala's road ahead and the lingering questions. Whatever happens next in Eala's career, and looking at her current trajectory, there is clearly a lot to look forward to. This 2026 Wimbledon tournament will always be remembered as the moment a 21-year-old from Quezon City turned a Grand Slam wildcard storyline into something far grander than a single opponent, regardless of whether that opponent ever actually stepped on the opposite side of the net. The match that never happened leaves many lingering questions. Will Serena appear at other major tournaments in the future? Was her withdrawal due to a physical issue, or simply a strategic calculation for the remainder of this comeback journey? No one has definitive answers, and that is perhaps part of what keeps the mystique of Serena captivating fans in its own way. As for Eala, the bigger question is whether she can sustain this form as the pressure and expectations from a nation grow heavier with every victory. Tennis history has seen plenty of young talents burn bright and then stall under the weight of expectation. But the way Eala talks about her motivation, not as personal pressure, but as the collective pride of a community, suggests a different psychological foundation, one that could sustain her far longer than many prodigies who burn out quickly. For tennis fans around the world, this story leaves a lesson more important than the result of any single match: that historic moments don't always need a perfect script to be meaningful. Sometimes it is the imperfections, the things that don't happen, that make the story truly unforgettable. Looking back at the whole narrative, Wimbledon 2026 won't be remembered for a match that never took place. It will be remembered for two entirely independent stories, each powerful enough to stand on their own, that happened to intersect in the same historic moment. On one side was Serena Williams, who taught us all that courage sometimes is simply stepping onto the court again, even when you have nothing left to prove. On the other side was Alex Eala, who taught us all that a historic story doesn't need a legendary opponent to be meaningful. It just requires resilience, preparation, and a community ready to stand behind you wherever you play. The question today's video leaves you with is this: did Serena's withdrawal truly rob us of an instant classic? Or was Eala's story always destined to stand on its own feet, regardless of who she faced next? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, stories like this, moments where sports transcend the boundaries of a match to become something greater, are exactly why Pro Tennis 360 exists. If this video gave you a different perspective on what just unfolded at Wimbledon, please hit the subscribe button for Pro Tennis 360 and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming analyses and behind-the-scenes stories on Alex Eala's journey and other developments in the tennis world. Every subscription helps the channel continue to bring you high-quality content like this. Thank you for watching until the very end. See you in the next story, where sports isn't just about numbers on a scoreboard, but real human stories that touch the hearts of viewers.